Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we're diving into two stories that took place in different parts of the Appalachian Mountains, but both leave us with zero closure. The first one's a bit longer than what I usually cover here, but as soon as I received it, I knew I had to share it with you. The second one is straight up terrifying, and if you do even a little digging, you'll see just how disturbing it is. Especially because of how often it actually happens. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. What I'm about to tell you is still happening. And to be honest, I think I'm really starting to lose my mind over all of this. I feel trapped, and I feel like something really bad could happen to me. What I'm about to share involves people I care about, and people I fully trusted until very recently. I swear, I don't know what to do. I feel completely lost. About a month ago, my boyfriend and I decided to take a mini vacation in a cabin in the Smokies. I'll call him Philip, though that's not his real name. We had stayed in a different cabin before, in another part of the same mountains, and it had been such a great experience that we wanted to do it again. The plan was simple: spend a peaceful week, mainly for me, because work had been draining all my energy and I seriously needed to unplug. Forests have always been my sanctuary. Even before I met Philip, I used to go hiking alone a lot. So the feeling of isolation wasn't new, and it wasn't uncomfortable either. And because I was going through a rough patch, Philip handled everything. He picked the place himself and made the reservation. But things started going wrong the day we got there. The cabin was nowhere near what the ad promised. And the front door, it would be funny if it weren't so serious. It was so flimsy, a strong push could break it open. A kid could probably get in if they wanted to. We were in the middle of nowhere, so the chances of someone showing up were slim. But still, I felt completely unprotected and vulnerable. I told Philip right away. He saw my face and tried to calm me down. Said not to worry, that we could block the door, and everything would be fine. That first night, we pushed the couch up against the door. Not that it would actually stop anyone, but at least it would make noise if something happened. And that gave me just enough peace of mind to sleep. We didn't expect anything to happen. It was just a precaution. We'd kind of planned out the vacation days, and that first morning, we were going to hike one of the nearby trails. I woke up before Philip and had everything ready to go. I just needed to grab a rope from the car. I always brought one for safety, and I had forgotten it there. Ever since we saw a documentary about surviving in the woods, I've taken these things more seriously. The car was about a 15-minute walk from the cabin, so I told him to finish getting ready while I went to get it. I figured I'd be back in about 30 minutes, tops. The walk was nice. It helped me get into hiking mode and start enjoying the day. The trail we planned to do was one of the longer ones, and it would take us most of the day, so we didn't expect to return to the cabin until evening. The forest was calm, and since it was early summer, everything was beautiful. It was a good day overall, but by the end we were both tired. And even though there was still plenty of daylight, we were ready to just stay in. That's when I saw something that made my chest tighten. And now, looking back, I should have pushed harder on it. Right on the front step of the cabin, on the railing, was a cigarette butt. It looked like it had been there for hours. Not fresh, no smell in the air, and I was almost certain it hadn't been there in the morning. It was right in the middle. I was convinced I would have noticed it. Neither of us smokes, so I asked Philip if he had seen it before. He looked at the cigarette butt in my hand and made a face I had never seen before. I can't even describe it. I just knew I'd never seen that expression on him. Then he looked at me and said, yeah, he had noticed it earlier, and it was probably from someone who stayed there before us. Said it was normal, told me not to worry. But the way he said it, the tone he used, gave me a weird feeling. I was almost sure it hadn't been there before, but he seemed so confident, so calm, that I let it go. He told me there was no one around, that everything was fine, so I brushed it off. We went inside, pushed the couch back against the door. I did my usual rounds, checking that everything was locked, windows, doors. Everything was in order, so I eventually calmed down and forgot about the cigarette. The next day, the problems piled up. We lost hot water and electricity. The cabin was off-grid but had 2 generators, which made it more comfortable. We tried to contact the cabin owner, but most of the time we didn't even have cell service, and I was starting to stress. This was supposed to be a relaxing break, but instead, it was full of little strange things. And I know it might sound silly, especially to someone hearing this from the outside, but it was the accumulation of all the little things. Taken separately, they were manageable, even justifiable. But together, they formed a weird pattern. And I started feeling more and more like something was really off. I told Philip that something didn't feel right and maybe we should just leave. But he insisted we stay. Said it was nothing, easy to fix. Said we should just enjoy the time since we were already there. That since he had arranged the cabin, he'd handle it. Told me to rest while he went to look for signal, or worst case, someone in the nearest town to help. When I said I'd go with him, he snapped that I was stressing him out, and it would be better if I stayed and rested. He had never spoken to me like that. I thought maybe he was right. Maybe I was just stressing out for no reason. So I gave in, said fine. I'd stay and try to relax while he figured it out. I felt paranoid, like I often did around him. I convinced myself he was right, that it was just exhaustion and stress, that I needed to unwind. As you can probably guess, that was a big mistake. I'll never ignore my instincts again. Better to be paranoid and crazy than hurt, or worse. Because looking back, and you'll see, the signs were all there. We just don't always know how to listen to what our body and mind are screaming at us. Ever since I came back from the Smokies, I've been trying to figure out what was real and what was planted in my head. I've never doubted myself this much. So, going back to the story and what happened next. He left, and I stayed. I figured he'd be back in 2 or 3 hours. But the hours went by, and still, nothing. I tried calling. Nothing. And the more time passed, the more I felt like a complete idiot for staying alone. No car, no communication, no power, and no idea if anyone was coming back. I was lying on the couch, going over all the things I should have done differently, when I saw movement outside. It was already dark, and I assumed it had to be Philip. So, without thinking, I ran to the door. I truly thought it was him. But as soon as my hand touched the doorknob, something inside me said, "Stop." I felt a tightness in my throat. On the other side, someone stepped onto the porch and knocked. It wasn't Philip. It couldn't be. If it were, he would have said something. He knew I was alone and on edge. He wouldn't have just knocked. I stood there, frozen, hand on the knob. Then I heard footsteps moving away. I peeked out the window and saw a man. Back turned, walking into the absolute darkness. I couldn't see his face. It was too dark and he was facing away. But I had no doubt it was a man. That confirmation, that I wasn't alone, hit me like a ton of bricks. Had he sabotaged the generators, planned to isolate me there? But how? The idea of me staying behind had come from Philip. No one could have predicted that. And that's when I saw a white envelope under the door. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I bent down slowly and picked it up. I stared at it, my hands shaking for what felt like forever. Then I opened it, and nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. It was a collection of photos of me. The oldest one was at least 3 years old, and it was me eating on campus. I graduated 3 years ago. Another one was at my doorstep. Judging by my hair, it must have been taken a year or so ago. One at work that looked like it had been taken just days ago, and one of me sleeping in my own bed. How? How the hell could someone take a photo of me sleeping? I felt physically sick and had to sit down. I was shaking, couldn't think straight, couldn't breathe. It felt like the ground vanished beneath me. I don't know how long I sat there, running through every possible scenario in my head. The only person who had a key to my place was Philip. And I had never seen any signs that someone had been inside without my knowledge, much less a break-in. I got up and looked through the windows. I couldn't see anyone. The forest felt way darker than the day before, almost suspended in time. I checked all the windows again and pushed not just the couch, but one of the cabinets against the door. I didn't know what was going to happen that night, but I knew I had a stalker. Someone who had been following me for at least 3 years. That night, for the first time, I suspected Philip. He had been acting strange since we arrived. He had booked the cabin. He had insisted I stay behind. He'd been passive-aggressive when I said I wanted to leave. At the same time, I couldn't stop worrying about him, wondering if I was being unfair, if maybe something had happened to him. Maybe that man had done something to him, and that's why he didn't come back. Maybe I was being really unfair. What I couldn't stop thinking about was how our relationship started. We'd been dating for about 8 months, but I met Philip in college, in my final year. We had mutual friends, sometimes saw each other at parties and dinners. Back then, I suspected he had a crush on me, but he never said anything, and I wasn't looking for a relationship. But over the next 2 years, we kept running into each other. Even though we didn't live close, I'd see him at the movies, the grocery store, the park. One day he told me he thought it was fate that we kept bumping into each other. I thought that was sweet and romantic. And from that day, we got closer. Eventually, we started dating. It had never occurred to me that running into him might not have been a good thing. Now, sitting there alone, with someone outside the cabin, I couldn't help but wonder if the circumstances that led to our relationship were anything but romantic, and definitely not fate. Maybe he orchestrated it. Maybe he'd been following me. Then I started going over every detail I might have missed while stressed. I thought about the man who left the envelope. It had been dark, and I was terrified when I saw him outside the cabin. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it could have been Philip. He had his back turned, but the build, the shape, it could have been him. I spent the entire night stewing over all this, feeling like a terrible girlfriend for even thinking it, for doubting him. But in the morning, I got confirmation that something was really wrong. He got back to the cabin around 10:30 a.m. I was obviously in shock. The moment he walked in, I caught the faint smell of tobacco in the air. Then I asked him what happened, why he took so long. He said he'd gone to the village, and since it was already past 6 when he finished, he just didn't feel like driving back to the cabin. The way he said it, and how casually he said it, felt like a punch to the gut. Even if he had nothing to do with what happened, he chose his comfort over my extreme discomfort. He knew how stressed I'd be, and still chose to let me go through that. I told him there had been a man outside the cabin, that someone had been stalking me. And he said I was being paranoid, that maybe I needed help. Another gut punch. He was trying to invalidate my feelings and being passive-aggressive again. I showed him the photos, and his face barely changed. At that point, I was almost completely sure he was involved, and I knew, for my own safety, I had to act like I didn't suspect a thing. I had to get out of that isolated place with someone I suspected was my stalker. I managed to convince him I agreed, that I was overreacting, that I was paranoid. I told him I wanted to stay at the cabin, forget everything that had happened, and just enjoy the vacation. But that my stomach felt really off, and I thought I might be getting sick. One thing I knew for sure was that he was a hypochondriac. The last thing he'd want was to be stuck inside with me if there was any chance I was sick and could get him sick too. So he eventually agreed we could leave. The drive back was quiet. At several points, I pretended to be asleep just so I wouldn't have to talk. As soon as he dropped me off at home, I left through the back door and went straight to the police. I don't know what was scarier, what happened at the cabin or the police's reaction when they told me that without hard evidence, they couldn't do anything. And even with evidence, he hadn't been violent. I didn't go back home. I left the police station and went straight to the airport. Luckily, there was a night flight to the state where my parents live. I won't say which state, and thankfully, he never knew where my parents lived. He never asked, and I never told him. I changed my phone and made my parents do the same. A lot of people will think I'm being dramatic, but I know what I saw and I know what I felt. Some days I wake up remembering new details, new red flags I ignored. So far, I haven't heard anything from him. I don't know what will happen next, but I don't think I'll ever go back to that house. I'm not the kind of guy who's great at telling stories, especially not when it comes to talking about how things made me feel, so I'll just tell it straight. This happened 3 years ago, right in the middle of October. Me and my buddy Jake planned a 3-night hike through the Appalachian backcountry, just south of the Virginia line. Not the kind of trails you find on all trails or whatever. These were real, half-forgotten paths, the kind folks stopped using after logging died out in the area. We were both born and raised around that corner of Tennessee, where everyone's got a cousin or uncle with some weird-ass story about the woods. You either grow up scared of those stories, or you get so used to hearing them that they stop meaning anything. They're just background noise. Me and Jake were more of the second kind. We'd heard it all. Skinwalkers, feral people, government labs, lights in the trees, and we'd laugh that shit off with a beer and a, "Yeah, okay, man." We packed light. Tents, stove, some bear spray, enough whiskey to keep the nights warm. Both of us had our rifles. Jake brought his dad's old trail map, a crinkled-up thing from the 80s with faded ink and notes in pencil. It was kind of ridiculous how he carried that thing around everywhere, but I didn't even comment on it anymore. His dad passed away 5 years ago, and ever since, he's held on to these little things. To me, it seemed pointless. Anything could happen, and he could lose them in a heartbeat. But if it gave him comfort and made sense to him, who was I to say anything? The plan was to camp by an old fire lookout the second night, then loop back down a different route. It sounded good. We were 26 and thought we were untouchable out there. Jake always said there wasn't anything in the woods worse than people, and we were ready to face people. The thing is, we were naive and stupid, and we actually thought we were the toughest ones around. Day one was fine. Clear skies, leaves crunching under our boots, the whole golden hour dream you get in October. We camped by a creek, drank just enough to sleep easy. There was no signal, but that's how we wanted it. Felt like getting peeled away from the world. It was on the second day that the woods started to feel off. The trail Jake remembered was harder to follow than he said it'd be. We'd lose it for half an hour at a time, then find it again winding uphill like it was trying to shake us off. And it got quiet. Like, real quiet. I've been in the woods enough to know how normal quiet sounds. This was different. No birds and no bugs, just leaves falling and our boots. Nothing else. We made it to the lookout spot by late afternoon, and the tower was mostly collapsed. Just the base and a few blackened boards up top. Maybe from a lightning strike or some dumbass camper years back. Still, the view was killer. You could see for miles, ridges rolling off into haze like an ocean of trees frozen mid-wave. I'm not usually the sentimental type, but man, that view was something else. We set up camp nearby, maybe 30 yards off the edge of the bluff. Started a fire, cooked some food, and hit the whiskey a little harder than we should have. Around 9, maybe 9:30, Jake said he was going to go take a leak and wandered off into the trees. That's when I heard the first sound. It was footsteps. I know how cliché that sounds, but I swear to God, there's no mistaking the sound of boots on dry leaves. Slow and careful. And they weren't Jake's. I know how he walks. These steps were heavier, like someone bigger, maybe in work boots. Out of nowhere, the footsteps stopped, just like that, dead silent. I held my breath without even meaning to, ears straining against the dark. And then I heard it. This faint, delicate sound. A little click. Soft as hell, but it cut through the quiet like a needle. Could have been anything, but it sounded like a lighter flicking open. I didn't move and didn't speak. Just stared out past the fire into the black. It was one of those moments where your brain tells you you're imagining shit, but your gut disagrees. A few seconds later, there it was, that smell. Real faint at first, then stronger. Weed. Someone out there was smoking. Jake came back a minute later, swaying a little from the whiskey, laughing about how he nearly pissed on his own boot. Then he looked at me, that grin already a little hazy, and asked if I'd brought any weed, which meant I hadn't imagined it. He smelled it too. I didn't answer his question. Instead, I asked if he saw anyone. He looked at me weird and said no. I saw his grin fade right off his face, and he looked at me dead serious. We knew each other well enough to read body language without saying a word. He knew I wasn't messing around, and he could see I was spooked. Without another word, he reached for his rifle and started scanning the woods. I grabbed mine too, instantly. After a good while trying to adjust my eyes to the dark, I thought I saw a faint trail of white smoke. Barely there, almost like my brain was making it up, but something was out there. I stepped forward, rifle raised, and demanded that whoever the hell was out there show themselves. Jake moved in right behind me, rifle up, and pointed the opposite way, covering my back. We stood like that, God knows how long, until this man stepped out from the woods. Like I said at the beginning, words aren't exactly my strong suit, but when I tell you this guy looked like a complete fucking psychopath, I'm not exaggerating. I'm absolutely certain of it. That calm, peaceful look on his face. He walked like he didn't even notice we had guns on him, like we weren't even there. I didn't lower my rifle for a second. Jake still had my 6, steady as ever. I asked him what the hell he was doing out there and told him to stay exactly where he was. And then he said the most calculated and disturbed thing I've ever heard. He told us not to worry. Said he'd already taken out a family just a few feet away, and he was good for at least a month now. I asked him what the hell that was supposed to mean, and he just smiled, that same quiet, hollow smile. Then Jake asked him what he had on his clothes. It was the first time I really looked at what he was wearing. My eyes had been locked on his face until then. His clothes were covered in blood. I still don't understand how I hadn't noticed it before. It looked fresh too. The firelight caught it just right. It was glistening in spots. His answer? You know damn well what this is. And then he turned around and just walked back into the trees. Didn't look at us again. Just disappeared into the woods like nothing had happened. We didn't need any more convincing. We called the cops right there on the spot. And believe me, around here, calling the police is not something we do lightly. When something goes wrong, we usually handle it ourselves. But this was way above anything we could deal with. That man was a killer, a full-on psychopath. We stood there, rifles in hand, back to back, alert to every little sound. The cops took about 45 minutes to get to us, which honestly is record speed for out here. They were more responsive than I expected, even called in a damn helicopter. But 2 days later, there was absolutely no trace of anything we'd said. No family and no man. The guy could have gotten away. But a whole family doesn't just disappear. If what he said was true, they'd be dead. They should have been found. It's been 3 years since then. I haven't forgotten that guy's face for a second. I don't think I ever will. I've tried to tell myself maybe it was some sick bastard playing a prank. But something in me knows better. I think when you come face to face with someone truly evil, truly twisted, you just know.